the honourable member for Saanich-Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honour to rise in this House today to discuss Canada's role in the responsibility to protect civilian life in Libya. United Nations Security Council Resolution 1973 gave us that mandate, and I want to be clear that had I been present in this House, Mr. Speaker, when this place first took the vote to support that mission, I would have voted with all the members present and said, yes, Canada has that role. There is no greater obligation or moral responsibility that falls on elected representatives in the course of any train of human events than the decision to send its fellow citizens into harm's way in a war zone and to risk their lives and risk the lives of others in pursuit of a cause in which it's been determined that only military action will suffice. In that sense, although the Green Party, not just in Canada but globally, subscribes as a fundamental principle to the pursuit of nonviolence and peace, we acknowledge that there is such a thing as a just war. In this context, the accepted international human rights norm of the responsibility to protect, which has been acknowledged since 2005, represents a new level of moral responsibility. To say, contrary to what we might have said ages ago, just as we might have said ages ago, if someone beats their children, it's not our business. If a man beats his wife, it's not our business. We don't go into their house. Now we have an exception to those notions of national sovereignty that say we can intercede. We can go into their house, Mr. Speaker, because we recognize that there's a wrong being conducted. Innocent lives are at risk. We have a right under the responsibility to protect to intervene. Why then do I fear that I must vote against this motion? We've seen what's now referred to as mission creep, an extension of the responsibility to protect within Libya to the goal of regime change. In order to meet the goals of UN Resolution 1973, our primary goal should be ceasefire, negotiated solutions, and diplomacy. But when the African Union came forward through South African President Zuma with a proposal, it was rejected. A peace proposal was rejected. Now, there may have been other flaws. I accept that. But the only peace proposal on the table, which was accepted by the government of Gaddafi, was rejected by key NATO partners because we suddenly said that a precondition to any ceasefire must be the removal of Colonel Gaddafi. Now, I must be very clear here as well. I deeply desire the removal of Colonel Gaddafi, but not by military means in what appears to be a civil war in which Canada has taken sides. An immediate ceasefire is needed, yes. Protection of human life is required. But many of the things I've heard honourable members say in this House over the course of today could apply to other governments where we haven't intervened. Now, it's not enough to say we haven't engaged in Syria, so we should not continue in Libya. It's not enough to say we've rejected the calls of the United Nations for peacekeepers to help end the systematic rape of women in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, so we mustn't continue in Libya. I'm not saying that. I am saying that other governments have turned guns on their own peoples, whether in Myanmar, or as I prefer to call it, Burma, whether in Syria, whether in other places around the world, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where we are not engaged. So when we do choose to engage, we must keep our eye on the mission. And the mission is the protection of civilians. My own experience of this is only generational. I can only speak of how I was raised by my father. My father grew up in London during the Blitz, and he shared with us something that I think we should all bear in mind when we decide to go to war. That there is, in his view, and he used to tell us this when we watched bombs falling on North Vietnam, there is no greater way to strengthen the resolve of a civilian people than aerial bombardment. There is no greater way to solidify the resolve to detest those who drop the bombs than aerial bombardment. We need to recognize that collateral damage is not just the lives of innocents that we inevitably lose in aerial bombardment. Collateral damage is damage to our very souls. Collateral damage damages our legitimacy. And collateral damage is something that, while inevitable in war, should be deeply, deeply avoided when our mission is to protect innocent lives, and we are not a nation at war. Mr. Speaker, for these and many reasons, I depart from the very good and noble objectives that I recognize on all sides of this House. I recognize that the opposition parties have put forward amendments which essentially say yes to the government motion, but they say yes, but. In my case, on behalf of the Green Party and my constituents of Saanich-Gulf Islands, I must say no, but. I see we have a role as peacekeepers. I believe passionately that we return to our role as peacekeepers as a nation that is so well known around the world for peacekeeping. I think we have a role within NATO to be the nation that stands up and says enough of the aerial bombardment. Now's the time to send in the diplomats. Let's work with colleagues who have some chance of reaching the illegitimate government of Mr. Gaddafi. Let's work with colleagues in the African Union, the Arab League, and the United Nations, and be the country that says we don't continue to give a blank check to a mission that has no exit strategy. And with that, Mr. Speaker, with deepest respect to all members on this side of the House, the other side of this place, I thank you all for what I know are deeply felt and high motives in going forward in the mission of Libya. But you will go forward without my vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a former professional diplomat, I can assure the honourable member that now is not the time to send in the diplomats in the absence of military support and in the absence of the military operations that are continuing. But in an effort to help the honourable member not become the outlier in this House on the vote later today, could I ask her where she sees in the government motion, in United Nations Security Council Resolution 1973, in the objectives that are being pursued by NATO allies to protect civilians, to establish a no-fly zone, to enforce an arms embargo, where she sees in any of the positions taken by the government, or indeed the official opposition and the Liberal Party today, any intention to pursue regime change.
The Honourable Member for Saanich-Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Parliamentary Secretary for his question, and I recognize that he has significant and quite impressive credentials in this area personally, and I salute him for that. But there are numerous indications. In the statements made today before this House, various members of the government party have said there can be no peace while Mr. Gaddafi is present. We cannot negotiate unless Mr. Gaddafi is removed. This is a report from the BBC that the former head of the British Army, Lord Donat, said the mission under UN Council Resolution 1973 is quite clear. It's to protect people, but of course the implied task, and let's be absolutely open and honest about it, is the removal of Colonel Gaddafi. End quote. We've heard similar things from other representatives from within the NATO mission, particularly the chair of the group within the contact group on Libya in Doha, meeting just recently, actually yesterday. UK Foreign Secretary William Hague stated that, quote, participants remain united and firm in their resolve. Gaddafi and his regime have lost all legitimacy, and he must leave power, allowing Libyan people to determine their own future. So I think there's ample evidence that the mission has shifted, and in fact, I'll mention to my honourable friend that if not for mission creep on the Libyan mission to protect civilians, we might not have lost the support of China and Russia in the United Nations to make a similar effort in Syria to protect lives there.
And comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for her comments. I'm a little puzzled, though, because during her remarks, she mentioned that she was aware of some of the atrocities that have been allegedly going on in Libya, including the allegations of mass rapes, which have been ordered apparently by the Gaddafi forces. These are the subject of a prosecution by the International Criminal Court. Right. And I wonder if she could explain to this House how we can step back and not protect the women of Libya by using our military under the UN resolution to protect the civilian population of Libya if we don't pass this resolution today and continue our mission until these terrible atrocities are stopped.
Honourable member for Saanich-Gulf Islands.
I thank the honourable member for his question, and I mentioned earlier today in the course of this debate that the inconsistency in the government's position troubles me greatly. We've been asked 3 times, not once, but 3 times by the United Nations to send 2 peacekeepers, in particular General Andrew Leslie's name was mentioned, to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where the proof of using rape as a systematic weapon of war affecting thousands and thousands of women calls for us to respond. We've rejected those requests. In this instance, I believe that we will have a role of great legitimacy as a nation that participated in the first phase of responsibility to protect and then steps out of that role, working through the United Nations to demand that we have peace negotiations with the first goal being a full ceasefire without the precondition of Mr. Gaddafi's resignation.